Hello, my name is Doug Vogt from the Untitled Foundation, and this is Series 10, Part 2 on the Exodus. And this is what we're going to cover. What did Moses take out of the cave? What was the rod? Now, if you're an electrical engineer or a computer programmer, you're going to like this. You'll have an idea of what happens when late Bronze Age people acquire a technology that's tens of millions of years more advanced than them, and what happens, and also how it was used. How did Moses communicate with the OS, the operating system, aka God? The 12 plagues, not 10. When was the Exodus? The sheep don't lie. You'll enjoy this. The first 27 days of the Exodus up to the crossing. Okay. This is the book I'm going to be teaching from, Volume 3, and it goes into this stuff in greater detail. Obviously, I can't do it in a 45 or 1 hour video, but it also is a continuation of Volume 2, which is the cause of the problem, which was Joseph and what he did and what he put into the family burial cave. So these two, this is really important. Now, Series 9. Parts 2 and 3. This is where I was about 12 or 13 years ago. In this, it would be chapters 6 and 7 of how the rod worked and how the Ark of the Covenant worked. I did a pretty good job in that one. And I also wanted to make it clear that my research and stuff like that is because of the wonderful work that Egyptologists, archaeologists, scientists and geologists did over this many years, that they wrote articles or journals, and I was able to figure out some of this stuff. I just question why they didn't figure some of this stuff out. That's the only question I have. Anyway, I'm trying to give you the education you should have gotten when you went to college, but because of the way society is, and I don't mean the current one, I mean for the last 2,000 years, we've been basically kept ignorant. You can't figure any of this stuff out, the Torah, unless you know Moses' 10 code systems. That's the reason I was able to figure out, and anthropologists and Bible scholars before me never did figure it out. You have to know this first. How the rod works is you have to first figure out the model that creates the Hebrew alphabet, and that we're talking about extremely highly advanced technology. These people had the same exact philosophy of the universe that I do. In other words, an information theory of existence. Once you understand that, then you realize you're not dealing with technology from a late Bronze Age people, but rather what they found in that cave. Video Series 8, Part 2 will help, and Video Series 6, Part 1, Moses 10 Code Systems. And on this, it's Series 2, Parts 1 through 3. You should watch it or get the book. There's more in the book. Here's the cast of characters. We obviously don't have any marble busts of Moses because it's against the Jewish religion to make an image of yourself, like a painting or a sculpture like the Greeks, the Romans, and the Egyptians certainly did. Here's Amenhotep IV. He is the pharaoh at the time of the Exodus. That's why he changed his name, and you'll figure out why. You'll know why. This is a face only a mother could love. This is his wife, gorgeous, real knockout. Now this is interesting about Moses. Sometimes what you know will incriminate you, because you have to ask yourself, how did he know this stuff? Remember, you're dealing with the tribal societies, and each tribe had their own little secret. They all kept together, you know. Anyway, these are the things that Moses knew that there's no way he should have known them unless he was an Ephraimite. One, he knew Joseph's name in Egypt was Senmut. Joseph embezzled a portion of the money from the sale of the Egyptian surplus food. He knew that. He knew that Joseph had split the money and hid them in two locations, Baal Zephon, which I showed you in part 2 of Series 9 on Joseph, and Mount Sinai, the family burial cave. He knew the number of official positions which Joseph held in Egypt under the name Senmut. He knew that Joseph had an affair with the queen while she was still married to Tutmosis II, who, as I showed you, was not a very good-looking guy, and she was a knockout. He knew the name of Queen Hatshepsut. He knew that, that's where he knew Potiphar and Potipharah. That's how I know he knew her. He knew that Joseph had a daughter with Hatshepsut who was married off to Tutmosis III, Tutmosis II's young son, maybe 2 or 3 years old, which made Joseph his father-in-law, also granting Ephraim and Manasseh equal rights to the throne of Egypt. Now you understand why Moses was raised in the Pharaoh's household. By the way, I covered that in part 1 of this series 10. He knew that the treasure was located in the cave of Machpelah, which Abraham had purchased. Only a descendant of Joseph or Ephraim would have known this. He knew where the cave entrance was, and more importantly, that there were more than one cavern rooms. He knew why 11 of the 12 original tribes were forced into slavery. He knew that the descendants of Ephraim did not surrender the treasure in the cave in exchange for freedom of their brethren. So much for brotherly love. Of course, they tried to sell him. Actually, some wanted to kill him first, and then a few said, oh, let's go sell him instead. So he had no great love for the other 11 tribes. I can understand why. Okay, after Moses murdered the Egyptian boy, and I explained why earlier, but I'll go into it again. He escapes and goes to Midian, and this is where Midians were. This is the upper end of the Red Sea, now called the Gulf of Aqaba, but here's a lot in Israel. And they were on both sides of this thing. And I think basically they were settled in this area where he was. I don't think he was married, so I don't think he was 20 years old at the time he did this. He was either 17 to 18 or 19 years old. And he was the younger, so the father, like I explained in the previous, gave him the dirty task of killing the Egyptian, who must have found out indirectly or directly that the Ephraimites knew where the treasure was. So he leaves and he goes to Midian. But I think before he went to Midian, I think he went back to Mount Sinai, took some money out, some gold, because he needed it to spend here, wherever this was, to start a new life. He took cash. I'm sure his father, Amram, gave him some money and gold. I think also he went to Mount Sinai in the cave and went inside and took more money out. So anyway, I think when he finally got here, he had enough money to basically buy a wife, and that's who Zipporah was. And it says, and Moses, led the flock to the farthest end. Okay, after he's there, and he's already at this point, when the story starts here, he's already either 79 or 80 years old. So he's introduced in Exodus 3:1, and Moses led the flock to the farthest end of the wilderness and came to the mountain of God unto Horeb. If you remember the code systems, there are about 7 different names for Mount Sinai. This is one of the coded names. Again, you have to take the word apart. Okay, it's about 90 to 95 miles distance between Midian, where I think he was, and Mount Sinai, if he took the route I think he did. And he went there because it was a savanna still. It wasn't the desert it was now. It was a savanna. And the flock must have been at least over 50 sheep. And he didn't do this thing by himself. And so you have to realize there's several things to know. One, he's 79 or 80 years old. He had a son, and you'll see later he had a grandson and a great-grandson. And he had it from both sides. His oldest son was Gershom. The youngest was Eliezer. They both had sons and grandsons. Anyway, the one-way trip would have taken 11 to 15 days with the sheep, herding the sheep. And the way back from Mount Sinai here, if he only took one of the sons himself, It would have taken about 9 days to get back, figuring they did about 10 miles a day. Okay, so all sheep in the northern hemisphere are born in February and most of them in March. Late February and mostly in March. I think he got there around the middle of February with the herd, with his relatives. And the sheep are born here. And it takes 45 days, well, I'll go to the next one. It takes 45 days for the sheep, the lambs to be weaned from their mothers. And they have to reach a body weight of about 15 pounds. So in other words, if the Passover was in March or April, there wouldn't be any lambs of the first year to sacrifice, which tells you the Passover did not happen in March or April. I'll explain why later, who did the change. Anyway, back to Moses' line. All we're given is Gershom, where I think he was born then, and Eliezer. Now, this is my what I originally thought he was born. I changed it, and you'll see in the next one, because I reconsidered. Because I think he had the money to buy a wife when he was about 20 years old, not 30 or 38. So he's only mentioned twice in the entire Torah. He's only mentioned once. Later, he winds up changing his name called Eliashima, the head of the Ephraimites. So what happens to Gershom? Really? Anyway, of the tribe of Ephraim, Hoshea the son of Nun. This is how I figured these two out. So Hoshea the son of Nun, an Ephraimite, he's the head of the Ephraimites, therefore this must be Eliezer's son, and this is his grandson, or Moses' great-grandson. Now, this wasn't his real name, Joshua. That's his nickname. His real name was Hoshea or Oshea, a.k.a. Joshua. And Moses called Hoshea the son of Nun Joshua. It's like a nickname. There was a Joshua who was an adult at the time of the Battle of Melech who held his hand up besides his brother. But that's not the same person. It's like a nickname. He said, I'm going to call you this. You're my general, like. We don't know how many sheep were in the flock, like I said, but it's got to be over 50. So this guy had a bunch of relatives, but how many did he really have? The key was trying to figure out what happened to Gershom. This is what the Torah tells us in Numbers 3:21. Of Gershon was the family of the Libanites and the family of the Shemites. These are the families of the Gershonites. Okay, this is how you spell Gershom with a mem, an M at the end, mem. And this is Gershon. It's really the same word. One of the code systems was adjacent letter swaps. He changed his son's name and swapped the M for an N to make it look like it wasn't his son. But he doesn't say he's part of a Levite. Where did he get this name? The Lebanites, spelled this way, Moses got it from Laban, who was the father of Rachel, or Jacob's father-in-law. So technically all the children that Rachel had, as well as her sister, could be called Libanites. But it's not. He grabbed the name from Laban. Now where did he get this other name from? Shimonites. There it's spelled this. He got it from the generation of Shem. This is the 11th generation of Adam. It's spelled the same. Shin, Mem, Shin, Bab. The last two letters creates the ITES. He went that far back in time to make it look like he's not an Ephraimite. But it's him. And technically, they're all Shemites. They're all descended from Shem. All of them. Anyway, this is how he's doing everything he possibly can to hide the real lineage of himself and his sons. So Gershom has a son, Leal, and Eliashaph. And this is what they mean. Leal, spelled this, means for God or belongs to God. The other name is this, to increase God. These sound like names that Moses would name his family would name his kids. This is a famous picture from the movie, The Ten Commandments, done by Paramount Studios. At the time, it was owned by Adolf Zucker, who was my great-grandmother's brother. Anyway, Moses arrives at Mount Sinai. He had to have been there about mid-February. Like I said, lambs take about 45 days to mature. Sometime in that period, end of February to March, he must have gone real deep into the cave, real deep. And he went to one of the caverns. And it's like if you went to Carlsbad Caverns, there's multiple caverns connected by tunnels. And he tripped something, and it played out for him. So he saw the image of a bush that was lit up. He calls it on fire. But it wasn't. He was looking at a hologram. That's the only way you have a bush that looks like it's burning but doesn't get consumed. It was basically a hologram. In the cave during the discussion, I explain more of it in the book. He gets this rod. Now God says, the rod makes its first appearance in Exodus 4:2. And the Lord said unto him, what is that in thy hand? And he said, a rod. Notice he says, it's not my staff, not my stick. If you're Irish, my shillelagh. It's not. And then later, we're connected. The serpent in Exodus 4:3 becomes a rod by verse 4. It became a rod in his hand. As he drops the thing down, it becomes a serpent. He picks it up again. Now, this is a literary device. I don't know if this thing could actually change and mutate to something that's living. I think Moses did it merely as a device, a literary device. So in other words, he's telling you the first time the snake shows up, it's really the rod. It's one of the principles he uses in code systems. If it's an algebraic principle. If A is equal to B and B is equal to C, therefore A is equal to C. If the first time it shows up in this part of the story, the rod is A and it becomes a serpent is B. Then the Genesis story, we know the serpent is B, then C in the story has got to be the serpent. So A is equal to C, the serpent. Now the legends say this thing is a blue crystalline rod. It's not a wooden staff at all. And that I believe more than anything else. We further informed about the device in Exodus 4:7. We learned that a voice comes from the rod and it can be changed, and it can change things such as water to blood. Let me explain. Because this is where a lot of atheists will say this is ridiculous and preposterous. That's why you have to look at that Hebrew alphabet stuff and the model that created and the people that created this thing. Remember, he winds up giving us the Garden of Eden story because he's telling us the people who put this technology in the cave. And I explained it in the book in series 2 and in the video. These people are six-dimensional beings that made a deliberate decision to de-evolve to fifth-dimensional beings. They're way beyond us, way beyond us. Their technology was so advanced, they had to know the actual computer program that creates this reality in order to build something like this, because it has to link into the operating system to make the thing work in this dimension. Now, the ark hadn't been made yet, so how does God, the operating system, talking to Moses? The only thing he has is the rod. So the rod also enabled him to hear commands from the operating system. It gets technical. Anyway, I believe Moses and one of his sons was with him on the trip to Mount Sinai to graze the sheep. I think the son went back to Midian with him to pick up the other son, the older son, who's, remember, probably in the late 50s or 50, and goes back. He picks up his wife, the other son, and himself, And basically the four of them go, I think, back to Mount Sinai to pick up money, gold, because they know they're going to Egypt. They have to have money to live and spend and stuff like that. So then the next part is really suspicious. Those who think Aaron and Moses were both Levites and say, oh no, Doug vote can't possibly be right. If Aaron's a slave, how did the Egyptians let him leave Egypt to cross over the brook of Egypt, which was the border between Canaan and Egypt? They let him leave the country. He couldn't do that if he was a slave. No, this guy was free as a bird. He was also the head of the family, too. And a high priest of Hathor, as I explained in the previous video. He was able to leave. Why is he coming back to Mount Sinai? The same time Moses is. What a miracle. Same reason. Pick up money to go back. He needed more money. I think Moses left his grandsons and his great-grandsons to finish to bring the herd back to Midian, which is logical. He had plenty of people. Okay, the trip to Tanis from Mount Sinai. Several routes he could have gone. He didn't take the northern route where the Philistines were. It would have been closer to Tanis. I think the whole group wanted to go back and up to Goshen to see what the condition was of the Hebrews there. And so I estimate it took them about 22 days to go from Mount Sinai, this route, and then finally up to Tanis, which is up here. And that's it. That's what he did. This is 18 miles from here to there. From Ramses, which is right now called Tel El Deba, it's about 13 miles, 13 and a half miles. Here's Goshen. As I showed in the previous video, Pharkush, which is what it's called today, was called Goshen. I explained why and I showed you. And here's Ramses, about 4.5 miles. Aaron and all the Ephraimites lived in Tanis with the rest of the descendants of Joseph. That's why we are told that Moses lived in the Pharaoh's household. This would have been the Pharaoh's household. Everything in this walled area. Now, his other brothers, remember Amram had 3 other brothers. They probably lived on the other side of the river because it's the other river phrase is mentioned a number of times. Even though they could have lived south or any place, but they were in the Tanis area, and they wouldn't have lived here. Moses' immediate families, Amram, because he was the high priest of Hathor, would have lived in the compound. Like I explained, they were related. They knew they had a Hebrew in the woodpile, so to speak. Other part, I think Joseph's descendants saw themselves as Egyptians. They were there for over 180 years. I think they saw themselves as Egyptians, not as Hebrews or belonging to anybody's tribe. From chapters 4 to 15, the Exodus story is really about the rod. It's not about Moses really, other than what he was physically doing with the rod. The rod is really the subject of these verses here. And the reason being is what it did. Whether it ever became a snake, I don't know. That was the opening volley between Moses and the Pharaoh Amenhotep IV. Anyway, Moses before the Pharaoh, Exodus 7:15, tells us the time of the year and the date this event takes place, Exodus 7:15. Get thee unto Pharaoh in the morning, lo, he goeth out unto the water, and there thou shalt stand by the river's bank to keep him, and the rod which was turned to a serpent shall thou take in thy hand. The Pharaohs lived in Luxor during the wintertime, and around end of April to about beginning of October, they then went back. They went into Tanis. They lived in Tanis. the service that we're talking about here, what he's talking about is the Pharaoh would bless the waters of the Nile, and we know when that was. That was in the summer solstice, which was June 21st. So he would bless the waters of the Nile, and they knew that was the planting season. Now, some of you, when I go to some of these, what they call plagues, think, well, it's impossible, this can't be, and stuff like that. I'm going to try to explain some of this, but you now know we're really dealing with high technology, one that's way beyond us also. That's based on an information theory of existence. There was a papyrus, this is the name of the papyrus that was found, and there's a paper written. I have the paper. If someone wants it, send me an email at research@diehillfoundation.com and I'll send it to you. You can read it, it's a PDF. And in the papyrus, it said these 8 items. There's blood everywhere. Lo, the river is blood. One thirsts for water. Lo, trees are fallen, branches stripped. Lo, again, is lacking on all sides. Birds find neither fruit nor herbs. Groaning is throughout the land, mingled with laments. Lo, many dead are buried in the river. The stream is the grave. The tomb became stream. And he who puts his brother in the ground is everywhere. All is ruined. That's number 8. I'm reading it to you because the type is small because I can't fit it on the screen. And that's what this is. This corresponds, and the writer here, and basically matched them up to the Exodus things. My job is to tell you how this thing worked. Now, I'm going to give you, those who are computer scientists and electrical engineers will recognize one thing right off the bat. It's a command structure. You have a device, whether it be a computer or in this case a rod, and you give it commands to do something. You'll see the pattern immediately. This is number 1. Description of the plague. The water of Egypt turned to blood. There's the reference. The command to the rod, touch the waters. Location was given, all of Egypt. Command and location, waters of Egypt upon their streams, on the streams, upon their rivers, upon their ponds, upon all their pools of water. There's a command of all the things that it's going to affect. Exclusion area, land of Goshen where the Hebrews were. Every time it's that. Time period when it happens, immediate. Duration, 7 days. Number 2, frogs. The command to the rod again, all location, all of Egypt. Command, rivers over canals, the pools, cause the frogs to come up upon the land of Egypt, ovens and even thy kindling ovens. There was all the locations where it's going to show up. The exclusion area, land of Goshen, time, immediate, duration, 2 days. 3, gnats or lice. Command to the rod, to the land, all of Egypt. Stretch out thy rod, so you know it's the rod that's doing all this. Smite the dust, touch the dust of the earth, that it may become gnats throughout all the land of Egypt. Do you understand what this is saying here? That rod transmuted matter into whatever it wanted to do. Gnats. Land of Goshen is excluded. Time, immediate. Duration, 8 to 14 days. I came up with that because that's the lifespan of gnats or lice. It may have been shorter, I don't know, but I'm telling you the duration of a lifespan. Number 4, flies, same thing. Will send command to the rod, all of Egypt. Swarms of flies upon thee, upon thy servants, upon thy people, thy houses of the Egyptians shall full of swarms of flies, and also the ground whereon thy are. And notice it tells you all the places the flies are going to be. Again, doesn't happen in Goshen. Time tomorrow. Duration, 1 day. Murrain, I had to look up murrain. Murrain's an infectious disease by that name. It affects cattle and other animals. Command to the rod again. Location, all of Egypt. The land of the Lord is upon thy cattle in the field, cattle in the fields, the horses, the asses, upon the camels, upon the herds, upon the flocks, a grievous murrain. In other words, he's telling the animals, telling us the animals of where this disease is going to fall. Land of Goshen is excluded, happens tomorrow. Duration, 1 day. Number 6, boils. Command to the rod. Every time it's the command to the rod. All of Egypt. It shall become small dust, and all that land goes in. Boils breaking forth from the dust. It tells you where and stuff like that. Land of Goshen is excluded, immediate, 1 day. At this point, I think all of Amram's sons and their families had already gone to Goshen. It's pretty safe to say that. They left Tanis and went there. And whether Moses and Aaron did, because Pharaoh keeps calling Moses and Aaron, and maybe it takes a whole day's journey to go from Goshen all the way up to Tanis and another day back. It's 18 miles. Hail, thunder, lightning, and barley and stuff like that is mentioned. The description of the plague. The command again is to the rod. The command is stretch forth thine hand again. What's in the hand? The rod. Towards heaven, that there may be hail in all the land of Egypt upon man and where upon beast and upon every herb of the field throughout all the land of Egypt. This says basically, if the animals aren't brought inside a home or inside a building, they're going to die. I guess they must have had hail as big as softballs or basketballs. Exclusion area, land of Goshen, immediate. Duration, 1 day. Moses spread forth his hand unto the Lord, and the hail stopped. In other words, the Pharaoh decided, okay, we're going to stop this. And he said he was going to let him go, and that didn't work out too good. Locust, again, command to the rod, all of Egypt. Stretch forth the rod over the land of Egypt, for the locust upon all the land of Egypt. Goes on. Exclusion area, time, tomorrow. Unknown how many days. Moses ends it. If he was in Goshen, then at least lasted 2 days because it takes 1 day up. Well, could be 1 day, could be 2 days, and then 1 day back. Remember, the Pharaoh's got to send a messenger from Tanis down to Goshen. That takes a day, and then another day for them to come back. So there's 2 days. And then Moses ended it because the Pharaoh kind of promised he was going to end it. But he said, I think you have to leave the cattle. Then an east wind, Moses had to give this command. An east wind came and blew all the locusts away. Number 9, to me, this is the scariest of all of them, and you'll understand in a second. 3 days of darkness. Command to the rod, all of Egypt. Stretch out thine hand towards heaven. Now that's interesting, not the sky. That there may be darkness over the land of where the land of Egypt, even darkness which may be felt. Now this is the key thing. What's darkness that's felt? They shall cause to grope in darkness. Grope. That's the word, actually, the translated word. Why does it say grope? You know who gropes? A blind man gropes. Now, I know the sun did not stop giving off light. And the exclusion area was the land of Goshen. They had no problem seeing. Now, the Egyptians, if they were in their house, they had an oven going, they had light there. How come they didn't light a lamp there? Or somebody had to have an oil lamp. Look what it says in the Torah. Thick darkness in all the land of Egypt, 3 days. They saw not one another. If you're in your room, in your house, and you have a light or an oil lamp, you should be able to see your relatives and your family in the same room. Neither rose any from his place for 3 days. they shall cause to grope in darkness. I'm not going to get into details of what happened. Those of you who are computer programmers and electrical engineers, I think you know what just happened. Especially if you understood Series 1, the theory of multidimensional reality, what just happened? 10, killing the firstborn of Egypt. The rod is not mentioned at all. But you know the command had to be given by Moses or his brother. And it says, now this is the interesting part here. And all the firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die, from the firstborn of Pharaoh that is sitteth upon the throne. Amenhotep IV's son was Shenenkara. You'll see him in a second. And he was a joint pharaoh. The father put him on the throne with him, I guess to ensure who's going to be pharaoh after him. And it says, the firstborn of everybody, even the firstborn of the beasts. Exclusionary land of Goshen started in 14 days. That's where it says, this is the first day of the first of your first of the year. And the month was Abib. And needless to say, considering what happened to the crops in the field, it tells you the time of the year. It was either August or September. It's the end of the growing season. So this thing didn't happen in March and April. Sorry. So, and it winds up saying, kill a lamb of the first year. Do not take a lamb from his mother's milk, or from weaned, and sacrifice it, and use the blood on the doorpost and the lintel. So you couldn't have any sheep of the first year if this thing happened in March or April. But because they don't get weaned until really May. So, but if this happens in September, October, this problem goes away. Then you have lambs of the first year. This is Shenenkara, Akhenaten's son. This is what he looked like. There's a statue of him. Here's his sarcophagus and the foot of the sarcophagus. And it's said, beloved of Amenhotep IV and stuff like that. When they found this guy's body, and they obviously took him apart, he was not embalmed. He stunk. And it was buried in haste, very obviously. And I think it's because there were so many dead, even for the priests and the guys who do the embalming, that they weren't too interested in embalming this guy. But I think the disease they had was probably Ebola, the way it sounds, not only in the legend, but in when the Egyptians describe it, that it was pretty bad, like instantly Ebola. Now, this is the summer solstice, what I was talking earlier. Here's the date of the summer solstice. This is when the Pharaoh would have blessed the waters of the Nile. So all these plagues happen between this area here to here. Now, the full moon, NASA says the full moon was on the 11th. This calendar series said the 12th. Someplace in between here was the full moon when the Passover happened. All these disasters happen in the latter part of June, July, and August, and a little bit of September. Well, I actually count 14 days earlier, and you're into here about. In fact, the 28th would have been the first of the Hebrew calendar, but that's would have been it. And so I think Moses and Aaron were probably in Tanis, but everybody else was down there, and obviously they were excluded. But they were there the night that this thing happened. So it either happened September 11th or September 12th. Here's Tanis. So they didn't leave, the Hebrews in Goshen didn't leave immediately, because it took them time, at least a day, for Moses and Aaron to travel from Tanis to here, pack their bags, and go this. Now, this is Tel El Meskuta. This is where I showed you in Series 9 on Joseph, I think it was part 2, that what Sukkot looked like. That's where the storehouses were. So the Pharaoh lets them leave. He had enough of this. And they then leave either the day after or 2 days after. And they go down this 50 some odd miles. And it took them 7 days in haste. Now you know what Sukkot is really celebrating. Not just a fall festival harvest holiday at all. It is celebrating the first 7 days of freedom till they got to Tel El Meskuta, Sukkot, where they cleaned out the storehouses. You want to know why the Pharaoh left him? You have to push everything you heard in the movie, The Ten Commandments. Because he didn't know, the writer of that stuff didn't know either. Of worse yet, he was taking some of this stuff from Josephus, not knowing it was really Arius Calpurnius Piso writing it, a Roman. They packed their bags and they left. Now, once the word got back to Amenhotep IV, which is probably quite a few days after, because he had to bury his son and the chaos was going on, someplace in this between here and Etham, which is now Suez City, word got back to him that, hey, guess what? The Hebrews cleaned out much of the foodstuffs, the only food they had left, in Sukkot, the warehouses. So he had to go after them. He had no choice. It wasn't anything I told you in the movies. This is what Sukkot looked like. I go into greater depth and you see what it looks like. This is an aerial of it. This is where I photographed in here. This is what the storehouses look like, where remains them. It was actually a pretty extensive area. It was all from here and even much further south, a couple of miles south. And this is what the storehouses looked. In Video Series 9, Part 2 has all of them, and I think you'll enjoy it. This is my time schedule. Tanis to Goshen. This is for Moses and Aaron, 18.6 miles. Took them about a day. I think they were already there. Then they would have left, 13th would have been a day after the full moon. Packed their bags, 40 miles to Sukkot. Average about 5.71 miles per day. Remember, they're taking the old, the young, cattle, other livestock, so they can't go too fast. Stay there a total now 8 days of this trip. They arrive at Sukkot, they clean out the place, or it took us whatever they needed, which is probably a plenty. Then the next part of the trip is Etham, and I'll show you all this stuff. This is the most logical trip I think they took. There's a canal along here, and I think they followed the canal, not on it, but the road that was next to the canal. They were actually on the other side already, on the Sinai side. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them on the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night. That's when they covered 5.7 some odd miles per day. The Torah says that the Hebrews numbered 600,000 men. Remember, the code systems was one of them. I had figured out the length of the sacred cubit. That's the number, 24.136 inches. Times 600,000 gives you that, divided by 12, you could say for the 12 tribes, gives you that. That's the 12,068 number with a couple of zeros after it. That's really the real message he's really saying here. Arrives at Etham, which is now Suez City down here, October 1. Okay, now, how did Amenhotep IV, who later changed his name to Akhenaten, how did he get the idea of the god Aton or Adon? Here's the pictures. Gee, and streamers coming down from it. How do you like that? Exodus, and he, God, took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. Akhenaten, when he had his revelation, changed his name. The image of Aton or Adon was a big round red orb with stuff coming down from it. Sound familiar? What's in the Torah in Exodus? Here's more pictures of it. There's no shortage of this kind of an image from Akhenaten in stone. I'll tell you why his god was Aton. Let me go back to his spelling of his name. It tells us, the Torah tells us in Exodus that Moses stuttered. And the Hebrew word for God is Adonai, a two-syllable word. So the first part of the word, Adon, the D and the T sound very close. And I think he thought he heard Moses said, Aton. So when he had his great revelation, maybe a year or so after, he calls his God Aton. Akhenaton means servant of Aton. He was not the originator of the first monotheistic religion. The Jews or the Hebrews were. For those alleged scholars who kind of try to give the Egyptians the credit for the first monotheistic religion, you're wrong, as usual. Okay, they get to Etham, and what does God say to him? Through the rod, of course. Speak unto the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth. That's the longitude and latitude of Ahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon, before it shall be ye encamped by the sea. Baal-zephon, this is the latitude of Baal-zephon. This is the latitude of this mountain range right here. That's what the name of the mountain range is. It's only 3 minutes further north than this. So when the Torah says it's opposite, where's this? Over against Baal-zephon, it's opposite. Yeah, it is. It would have been like over here, way over there. No one ever thought it was the other side of the Bay of Suez. Oh, by the way, this is the satellite photo of what this thing looks like now. There's Suez City. This is the route they took over here. Right here is the choke point. So they've got this ball of fire by night and by a pillar of smoke by daytime. If you ask me what was created by that rod, which I'm sure Moses had to create it by a command that God told him what to say, it probably was a plasma of some sort. It would be like ball lightning on steroids. They arrived here, I calculated October 5th. It took them 4 days to get here from Etham. The mountain range is Pi-hahiroth. That's this mountain range right here. And the Pharaoh, he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt. 600 times 24.136 equals the 14,000. Divided by 12 gives you the 12,068 number. Take the word apart, Pi-hahiroth. That's how we spell it. It's made up of 3 words or parts of words. The first is this, which means to only or to see. The next word is this, means swiftly to hasten. And the last word, this, means terror. You put it together, to see swiftly approaching terror. His chariots are coming across here. That ball of plasma or fire is above here. Here's the choke point. That's where it is. I'm going to show you what's there now. There's a quarry here. They cut much of this mountain down. It went all the way to here. I got out of the car and I photographed this thing and I looked and examined the thing. There was a mountain and the choke point was here and they couldn't go past this. Remember we said chariots, so they're stuck on wheeled things drawn by a horse. They had to stay on the road. Here's the quarry. This is how much they cut of the mountain away. It went all the way to here, all the way to the street. That's what it looks like today. Here's that spit of land. There's an inlet from the ocean, I should call it a sea, the Red Sea. Here's what it looks like on it. Here's another. There was evidence of reeds on it, but this is a scrub brush that's here today. Here's another view here. This, by the way, Balsaphone is about over here. This is the path they took. Now, in the next video, you're going to see what Aaron had built after they crossed and Moses went off to Balsaphone to pull the remaining gold out of that mine shaft, which I showed. Ironically, with my GPS and also with Google Earth, 1,268 yards from there to along here, or 36,204 feet. How do you like that? Maybe that's why Moses said the 600. He's telling you what the distance is. Also, it's 1.5 sacred cubit miles. Sacred cubit miles is 4.5971 miles. I want to do a video of what I discovered, which will shock you. And you'll understand that this is a created reality. You'll have no doubt in your head. Here's a bathymetric map of it. It's about 90 to 100 feet deep here from there to here, along here. The 11th plague. I said there were 12. You're going to find out. To accomplish the crossing of the Bay of Suez, the operating system, God, again, instructed Moses to use the rod. This sign did convince the Pharaoh that Moses' God was God and not the Egyptian gods. This is the event that changed Amenhotep IV's mind. What he saw, it was unequivocal. Exodus 14:15, and the Lord said to Moses, look at the command structure. Lift thou up thy rod and stretch out thine hand over the sea and divide it, that the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back, divide, by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. He gave a command to the rod to divide the waters, and they split. Now you understand what technology is all about. It's not magic. It's not a miracle. It was technology. Here's a lovely painting, 19th century. Great artist. 12th plague. To accomplish this, the operating system again instructed Moses to use the rod. And the Lord said unto Moses, stretch out thine hand. What's in his hand? The rod. Over the sea, that the waters may come again upon the Egyptians, upon their chariots, upon their horsemen. He closed the water. He said, come back again. Gave the command, and that was the end of it. That's the end of this video. I hope you got a good indication. One thing you learned, the Passover was not in March, in April. You're going to find out why. And the next, I think I'll maybe say in the next one. And I'll say this. It was the first king of Israel, Jeroboam, who wound up changing and swapping 3 holidays because he didn't want the people to go to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur and Simchas Torah. So he swapped holidays. And that's why the kingdom of Israel and kingdom of Judah fought each other for a long time, because he did that. As they say, it's good to be king. Now, I'll tell you the rest of it. Why not? I'm going to leave you hanging. King of Israel was defeated, I think, 730 or 740, and they're dragged by the Assyrians to Babylon. And the Assyrians are then destroyed by the Babylonians. And when the Babylonians defeated the Judean kingdom, and they brought the what few priests were left, and the Hebrews there. Guess who greeted them at the gates of Babylon? The pagan priests of the kingdom of Israel, their descendants, of course. And that's why we're stuck with these holidays swapped. Now, many of you, my fellow Jews out there listening to this is going to drive you crazy and nuts, but I'm sorry I showed you a whole bunch. The lambs don't lie. The Pharaoh was in Tanis at the time in March. Therefore, I'm sorry, he was in Luxor at the time of this and didn't go to Tanis until April or May. So it's impossible. And the crops were in the field at the time of all these plagues. There's no question the Passover was in the fall. Now you know who changed it. Anyway, I hope you learned something from all this and you enjoyed it. The next one will cover the rest of the Exodus all the way up to Mount Sinai, and I'm going to show all the altars that Moses had created. At 80 years old, he's not creating all that much. He's pointing a finger. And that's how this whole thing happened. And I hope you enjoyed it, and you'll hopefully going to learn a lot.